it was a really stressful and difficult time on board our ship because we're in these developing nations trying to encourage and strengthen and support the medical systems that already exist in these countries, which are very limited.
Yeah.
And if COVID were to come on board our ship, we would have had to have been admitted to local hospitals and we would have overtaken them. Our crew was so large. And so we needed to get out as fast as we could so that we didn't do any damage. But in that time, as the crew, we were given the option to leave. We were given the option to fly back while the airport was still open, which was a small window. My husband, I remember so clearly him coming to me. It was about midnight. And he said, they're asking if we want to leave. And he said, Rayanne, we were called here to serve the crew. And that is what we're going to do. For such a time as this, God has called us to care for the crew that needs it now more than ever. Yeah. And so I felt complete peace. I said, yeah, I feel safe. I feel fine. We are going to stay. But I really felt affirmed that God was like, this is what I had you here for. I knew exactly what was going to go down. And this is what I had you here for. And it was such an incredible gift.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenna Lee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey everyone, real quick before we dive into today's episode, today's topic is cultivating revival in your family and in your home. And given that, it was perfect timing to invite you to a summit that I am going to be a part of in the very end of October. I believe it's the 27th, 28th, 29th. It's a free summit for any of you moms or parents who are looking for a way to say, hey, what is my next steps? How do I cultivate revival in my home and in my family? I'm really serious about shifting gears and seeing Jesus show up in my home. And this is a great way to start. In the episode today, we talk about what are my next steps. If I want to bring revival in my home, what are my next steps? This is a really great next step. And it happens in just a couple of weeks. So you're going to want to head over to the link in the show notes where you can get signed up for free. There is a VIP pass that includes a live Q&A session and even a one-on-one consulting call with Alyssa Ron, who is the host of Revival Moms. I will be there at the Q&A, and it's just an incredible time. Some of the topics that we're covering is raising eternity-minded families, moms connecting with purpose, revival in your marriage through the 12 types of intimacy, built for boldness, how to cultivate your spiritual gifts and those of your children. That's my topic. Moms called to business who wreak havoc on darkness. So many great topics. So again, go check out the link in the show notes and get registered for the Revival Moms Summit. I can't wait to see you there.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me here for another episode with Java with Jen. I am here with a new guest. Her name is Rayanne, and she is with Mercy Ships, which if you've never heard of Mercy Ships, it's an amazing ministry that has a global impact. It's just phenomenal. It's gonna touch your heart as we dive into this. But I am excited to have her on here to share her story, especially for those of you who are listening who maybe have a heart for missions. You want to help reach the nations. Maybe you've always wanted to be a missionary, or you're not to be a missionary, but you want to help somehow. This is an incredible vehicle, no pun intended, to literally help you reach the nations. And so Rayanne's going to share her story, talk about this ministry, Mercy Ships. And so Rayanne, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. And she is calling from California. I'm a little bit jealous because you guys know I love California. But so Rayanne and her husband and her 3 children joined Mercy Ships back in 2019 after they left everything behind in California, though they are back there, and boarded the Africa Mercy in Las Palmas and made their first sail down to Dakar, Senegal for their first field service. On board, Rayanne volunteered in the communications department and later in chaplaincy. Currently, she works in Mercy Ships' U.S. marketing department. She is the host of the New Mercies podcast, is the voice of the New Mercy Minute Daily radio broadcast, and serves as a staff writer. So you're in the marketing media world, similar to me. And so I love that I get to talk to somebody who understands all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit first of all, how did you get involved in Mercy Ships? Maybe even explain a little bit what Mercy Ships does for anyone listening that is not familiar, and then maybe share how you got connected with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mercy Ships, for any of y'all who haven't heard about it, we have the largest non-governmental hospital ships in the world. And we specifically focus on surgery. And we have about 6 areas of specialty that we do. And we perform free, life-changing, and in many situations, life-saving surgeries for people who don't have the resources in developing nations, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa. So Mercy Ships has been around for about 45 years. And as a family, we had never heard of Mercy Ships until a good friend of ours, Beth, came to us and asked us if we would support her financially because she was going to go be a kindergarten teacher on board the Africa Mercy. Wow. You might be thinking, a kindergarten teacher on board a hospital ship, this makes no sense. But actually, it's kind of like a floating city. And there's a lot of people who come on board to serve and they have children. They bring their families on board. And so those kids need to go to school. So we have fully accredited academies on board our ships with teachers from all over the world that teach our kids. So Beth asked us, hey, would you support us? And we said, well, we've never heard of Mercy Ships, but we love you. And so we began supporting her and learning about Mercy Ships through her. Wow. We would do FaceTime visits with her, which was so much fun to see the ship and where she was in the world. And really, we began to pray for the patients that she would tell us about and pray for the crew. But there was a time when God called us to go and to be a part of the mission. My husband had been in law enforcement for about 20 years, and he was close to retiring. He also was an ordained pastor when I first met him and has a long ministry background, and he really wanted to get back into full-time ministry after law enforcement. So began looking at opportunities, and Mercy Ships was hiring a chaplain for 2 years, starting in 2019. And as a family, we just decided this is what we want to do with our kids. We had 3 kids. They were all at great ages to go do something like this. And we took a huge leap of faith and we said, yes, God, we'll go serve. And so we did.
That's incredible. Okay. So I have like 12 questions now. So your kids and your family lived on a boat for 2 years.
Well, that was what we set out to do.
Okay.
We got on board in 2019 and we all know what happened in 2020. So we didn't get to live out our full 2-year commitment, unfortunately. But yes, we got on board and we lived in 500 square feet, all 5 of us in a little cabin on board the Africa Mercy. And it was hands down one of the most extraordinary experiences we've ever had as a family. And even though it has been, 5 years now since we first got on board, I can honestly tell you there is not a week, let alone maybe 2 or 3 days that goes by when we don't reference the ship in some way, shape, or form. It just radically impacted all of us.
That's amazing. So then that was my next question. 2020 hit, and obviously, and I know someone who was actually on a boat when COVID broke out and they couldn't even dock and go inland anywhere. So she was stuck out in the ocean for like 45 days or something on this tiny little buoy boat, this tiny little thing. So were you guys stuck at sea or did you have to port? Like what happened there?
Yeah, we weren't in a little boat. Luckily, we were in a large ship, and there was about 250 of us in the end when all the dust cleared of many people leaving to go back to their home countries to help out. Obviously, we're a hospital ship, so we have a lot of medical professionals on board. But we were one of the few vessels that was granted safe access to a remote port in Tenerife, which is in the Canary Islands. I know there were tons of cruise ships and large ships just floating out in the ocean, but we luckily were able to go to our home port, which is in Tenerife, and stay there, which turned out to be a very, very long time. As a family, we stayed on board, I want to say almost 3 months before we came back to the United States, but a lot of our crew remained for much longer than that.
Wow. So was that 3 months the longest that you guys were stuck on the ship without being able to get off somewhere?
Yeah, pretty much. We definitely eventually were able to get off the ship. When we were in Tenerife, the government allowed us, we were the only ship in the port. So it was kind of silly that they wouldn't let us off.
Yeah.
But eventually they let 5 people off at a time to do laps on the dock. And then, eventually we had to be masked, even though we had been isolated from day one. But regardless, everyone was being cautious and safe.
Yeah.
But eventually, yeah, people were able to get off.
Wow, that's incredible. My brother-in-law is actually a naval chief, and he was out at sea during all of that. And so it delayed their return by like 3 or 4 months or something. Like it made their 6-month leave actually like a 9 or 10-month leave. It was crazy. And they just couldn't get off. They just couldn't get off the boat. And so that's amazing. So you guys were chaplains on there. How large is this ship? Is it like a cruise ship size or smaller than that?
Well, so we have 2 ships right now, and our one ship, the Africa Mercy, was a converted rail ferry from Denmark. So it's not as big as our Global Mercy, which is our first ever purpose-built hospital ship that just launched in 2023 for their first field service. And the ships, they're pretty big. They're not as massive as cruise ships. The Global Mercy is bigger. I want to say that the Africa Mercy has 8 decks and the Global Mercy, I think, has more like 12 or even 13. Unfortunately, I have never been on the Global Mercy, only the Africa Mercy, but they're very large vessels. I mean, they have 6 operating theaters on the Global Mercy and 5 operating theaters on the Africa Mercy. We house hundreds of patients and hundreds of crew members. So yeah, they're floating cities, really.
That's incredible. That's so incredible. So what did your children do while you guys were on the ship? I would imagine that they find things for everybody to do to help support what's happening there. And so did your kids have jobs? How old were they?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my son was 10 years old and my twin daughters were 13 when they were on board, and they all had a birthday. So they all got to advance a year, but the kids go to school, I mean, it's kind of like a normal life, except instead of having to get in the car and drive to school or ride your bike to school, they literally walked out their cabin door and maybe took 5 steps and were in the academy. So the commute was great. If school started at 8, they could wake up at 7:55 and still be on time. But yeah, the kids go to school all day, from about 8 to 3, like normal. And then when school's over, they play just like kids do. There were activities for them. They had one of the crew members, he was a soccer coach. And so he coached soccer for the kids out on the deck if any kids wanted to play. There were kids who joined a running club and they would go running. And I know some of the kids even competed in local marathons and local races. But yeah, just, kids being kids doing homework, kids playing together with each other.
That's cool.
And we have freedom to get off the ship at any time. And so we went surfing a lot as a family, went to the beach a lot. There's just tons of adventure. There's so much fun.
I was going to say, that sounds like just such a giant adventure. I like, it kind of makes me want to pack up my family and do the same thing.
Do it.
I know, right? So, I know we just became senior pastors. I don't think our church would appreciate that. So, okay, I have all these questions, but so let's dive a little further into your story as far as when you guys felt like, because people listening may be thinking, okay, that's kind of a big jump from I'm supporting these guys financially to I'm picking up my whole family, maybe selling my house, maybe you didn't, I don't know, but then relocating to a ship. And how was there a moment when you just were very aware the Lord was speaking to you, or was it a bunch of small things? How did you know the Lord was directing you guys to do this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that God speaks to us in so many different ways. And I think sometimes it's hard if we have a preconceived idea of how God calls us or how God speaks to us. If we have that preconceived idea, then oftentimes we're so focused on trying to hear that one thing or, have him make it so clear that we really miss out on what he's showing us every day all around us, and our God is not a God of confusion. He's not a God who hides himself. So it's not like this game that he's playing with us and we have to figure out, is this his will? Is he calling me to do it or not? I think if God puts a passion on your heart and gives you an excitement and a joy for something, then go for it, But for us, like I mentioned, my husband was looking into ministry opportunities after retiring from law enforcement. And when he mentioned mercy ships, I thought, there is no way in the world my very safe, first responder, conservative husband is going to move his wife and 3 children to live on a hospital ship in West Africa. Like, there's no way. I was the crazy one in the marriage. I'm the reckless one that's like, let's go. And he's, just very safe. And so when he brought it up, I did not take it seriously. I thought there's no way he's going to do this. But he kept watching videos of mercy ships online. YouTube has a million videos that crew have posted or the organization has made. And he just became obsessed. And he would get the children to come watch these videos with him. And they would always say, Mom, come join us. And I'd be like, oh, I'm good. I'm making dinner. Or, I'd kind of always have something else to do because I thought there's no way we're ever going to do this. But God really spoke to my husband and said, this is what I have for you and your family. And one thing that was so awesome about Mercy Ships is they said, God doesn't call individuals, he calls families. He's not just going to call my husband and then the rest of us have to get drug along and we don't want to do it, but instead God really aligned all of our hearts. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is like my ultimate dream in life, to do something totally out of the ordinary with my family. I'm all in. And the kids, they thought, okay, if we can, we'll do this. If we can only go for 2 years, 2 or 3 years, we'll do it. And they were excited. And so we did go. And in the process of preparing to leave, I think that's when God really began to speak to us in more tangible and clear ways that really affirmed the decision. And one of those ways was really in his provision for us. Our crew on board, they're all volunteers and we raise our support to go. Well, as a family of 5, we had to raise quite a bit of support to go, 5 of us for 2 years. And we really prayed about that. And God was so extravagant in providing for us people that wanted to come alongside of us, people that we didn't even know. We were at our home church one Sunday. It was actually a week before we were going to Texas for our onboarding before we went to the ship. And we had, a gap. I don't even remember. I want to say like $20,000 that we still needed. And our missions pastor got up and said, come on, let's help close the gap for the Newquist family. And our church was across the street from Pepperdine University in Southern California. And it just so happened that there were some parents visiting their kids at university that weekend, and they were at church that Sunday. And after we did our presentation, there was a man who we'd never met before from Chicago who came up and wrote us a check for $10,000.
Wow.
And just said, the Holy Spirit totally moved me in your presentation and God's calling me to do this. And through God moving through other people, it really just affirmed our decision. And we felt God saying, be assured, this is what I have for you. And all of that, there's many more stories I could tell you, but all of the assurance that God gave us going into it was really important because it did not go as we planned. And it did not end up like we thought because of COVID. But because we had all that assurance ahead of time, we didn't regret or get angry, when COVID hit and go, God, why did you do this to us? It's like, no, we know we were here for a reason. And really that probably was the time when God spoke the most clear to us was when COVID happened. And, it was a really stressful and difficult time on board our ship because we're in these developing nations trying to encourage and strengthen and support the medical systems that already exist in these countries, which are very limited. And if COVID were to come on board our ship, we would have had to have been admitted to local hospitals and we would have overtaken them. Our crew was so large. And so we needed to get out as fast as we could so that we didn't do any damage, if you will. But that meant discharging patients, very quickly. It meant tearing down something in a week and a half that took over a month to set up. And it was a huge undertaking and everyone was scared, because we didn't know what was going on in the world. This obviously everyone was affected by this, right? But in that time, as the crew, we were given the option to leave. We were given the option to fly back while the airport was still open, which was a small window. And really, my husband, I remember so clearly him coming to me. It was about midnight. And he said, they're asking if we want to leave. And he said, Rayanne, we were called here to serve the crew. And that is what we're going to do.
Mm.
For such a time as this, God has called us to care for the crew that needs it now more than ever.
Yeah.
And so I felt complete peace. I said, yeah, I feel safe. I feel fine. We are going to stay. And it was so amazing because my husband, having been a first responder, he was trained in critical incident debriefing.
Yeah.
And once all the dust settled and we, packed up the hospital and discharged our patients and all that kind of stuff, and we started sailing to Tenerife, my husband and I were able to offer optional debriefing for all of our medical teams that had gone through a really stressful time. They were working 24-hour shifts around the clock because they were so shorthanded, and it was really difficult. But I really felt affirmed that God was like, this is what I had you here for. I knew exactly what was going to go down, and this is what I had you here for. And it was such an incredible gift. Yeah.
That's so amazing. That's so beautiful. And I can see that completely, how the Lord knowing what your husband's strengths were beyond chaplaincy, being able to handle emergencies. That's amazing. And I want to point out something that maybe you've connected this dot already, but I've seen this in other situations. Your guys' fundraising, I firmly believe, went so smoothly because in the support of your friend, you had sown seed into your own provision. Because in fact, when my son was looking for a car, and he was like praying for a car, praying for a good deal and whatever. And so one of my dear friends, she's also very big on giving. And she was like, well, Judah, then you need to sow some seed for this. And she's like, do you regularly sow seed? He's like, yeah, I give for the, there's a fundraiser they do in the youth group. They take up an offering for where they supply cars to missionaries. And I don't remember what it's called, but she said, and he goes, yeah, I give to that almost every week. And she was like, bruh, you've got enough seed in the ground. You're going to get a car, no problem. And so sure enough, we found an incredible deal for him, almost a brand new car for like $7,000, like super great deal. And so it was like eye-opening for him that he had paved a way for his own provision by faithfully sowing. And that's what you guys did. You faithfully supported your friend for so long. So it's not a surprise to me that the fundraising was so fruitful because you had laid a lot of seed into the ground for that. And so
wow, I love that. I'm so grateful that I hadn't connected those dots, but isn't that just like God's economy? I mean, that's just the way that the kingdom of God works, and the body of Christ working to give to each other according to our needs. And you know what? I hadn't thought of that, but I'm actually really excited to share that with my family tonight at dinner, because you're right. And what an encouragement to continue to be generous people who give and to sow, because who knows what God has for us. Oh, you're going to make me cry.
Exactly. Oh, I love it. Okay. So I have another question. So when it comes to your kids, and kind of like you said, that Mercy Ships, teaches is that God doesn't call just the one, he calls the whole family. So I have no doubt that your children were clearly impacted by this journey, besides the fact that it was just a huge adventure. But how were their spiritual journeys impacted? Did they have little moments where they had encounters with the Lord, or moments where the Lord just kind of pivoted or created a fork in their life road where they were like, suddenly they know what they want to do with their life, or just anything like that? What were some moments for your kids in that?
Oh, yeah. Now you're really going to make me cry. My kids were all totally impacted. And I think it's important to say every family and every person has a different experience on board, kind of like we all do in life, right? And I know that for some kids, that transition is really hard to live on board. And even for my kids, they left a lot behind. We did sell our home, and we did retire from careers and get rid of just about everything we own to go. Mercy Ships doesn't require that, but that was something that God had spoken to us, that there was to be no plan B, that we needed to trust him completely and move forward.
Wow.
And all the kids leave stuff behind. My kids left behind soccer and ballet and baseball and friends. And, it is difficult. And there were some nights of tears for sure, where the kids were like, we're homesick and we miss our friends. But I have to tell you, the tears that were cried when we got off that ship were much harder than the tears they cried in the first month or two when they were homesick at first. But my kids' lives were totally changed. And I'll tell you, one of my daughters, Georgia, she was constantly asking to go down into the hospital. And because the beauty of the ship is you kind of have free reign over everything. Where else do you just get to walk down into a hospital whenever you want and visit with patients? That doesn't happen. But she would be like, Mom, I want to go visit the patients. And if I'm being honest, like I was a little uncomfortable. I mean, just walking into a hospital where there's noises and smells and but also you're in a place where people don't speak your language and it's just very different. I was uncomfortable. She wanted to go all the time. And so we would go down and she would love to play with the patients and hang out with them. And that sweet little Georgia girl is leaving in 4 weeks to go to nursing school at Samford University because she wants to become a nurse and go back and live on the ship. I mean, it radically changed her life as a 13-year-old kid. Yes, God called her, into the medical field. And we say often as a family, if it were for nothing else than that, then it was worth it, know, but God has called her to do it. And so anyways, my kids' lives were totally changed.
That's so completely amazing. And what I love about that is that, and I want to pull this out even for my listeners, that in your obedience to follow the Lord, it creates moments for him to flip the switches in their lives on their callings. Yeah. So like with my own kids, we saw the same thing. And some of it is silly, like we took our kids to SeaWorld, we took our kids to SeaWorld and we were so excited. We don't often get to take vacations. We've been in ministry the whole time we've been married. So, vacation is a luxury. And, but we took them to SeaWorld and my 2-year-old at the time became obsessed with Shamu and sharks. And since then, and he's 12 now, he is determined he's going to be a marine biologist. And he is like an expert on all things aquamarine, And so, but it just amazed me. I was like, that flipped his switch. And my oldest son, a phenomenal guitarist, has gotten all these prophetic words about his music impacting all the generations around the world. Like, we just believe there's such a calling there. And he said, and I asked him, I said, baby, what was the moment when you realized you had to play guitar? And he goes, Mom, you were listening when we were driving in the car. I was about 5 years old or 6 years old, and you were listening to a Shane and Shane worship song in the car. And I heard them do something like a slide on the guitar, and I heard it squeak or squeal or whatever, do its thing. He goes, at that moment, I knew I needed to play guitar. But it was like, all of the first one was we were loving our family, prioritizing our family. The second one, I was worshiping the Lord in the car, and so you just never know. But when you're walking with the Lord and doing the things he's called you to do as a parent, built into that is the journey of your children and them finding what they're called to as well. And because a lot of families in your position, I think a lot of mothers could wrestle with, you're expecting me to take my whole family on a ship. What are my kids going to miss out on? And the brain can go to all of the what ifs,
of course,
missing the point that obedience is where the discovery of God's call in our lives is. And so anyways, I just
no, it's good. And you know what, too? I just think that, we look at things through our human lens, right? And we look at all the sacrifice, all that we have to give up to do something. But man, the things that God gives far outweigh what we could ever give up, And we were just talking about it as a family actually yesterday, that my son was totally on the track, baseball. I mean, that was his passion. He was great. And, once we went to the ship, everything kind of stopped. The sports kind of stopped. And we came back during COVID and the sports had still stopped. And then we moved. But my kids go, you know what, Mom, though, I don't regret it. I don't regret it at all, because I got to see the world and I got to live with people that had nothing and were so happy. And I got to see lives change. And so I gained so much more than I gave up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's something most kids and most people will never experience that. Not because they can't, but because they just don't take the opportunity, or they don't, that it's easier to stay back in fear than to shrink back than to just take the risk. I mean, you guys took a very calculated risk, if you will. I mean, it's not risk in the fact that the Lord is going with you, but to the outside eye, it looked like probably a very calculated risk that you were uprooting your whole family. So what would you say is one of the most valuable things as a family, and which we've touched on some of this, but looking back over the time that you spent there, and now that you guys are transitioned and you're back, you're still a voice for Mercy Ships, doing the media and the marketing and all of that kind of stuff. What would you say were some of the most valuable takeaways from that season as an individual, but then also as a mother, as a family, just any of those valuable takeaways?
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many, because just life on board is so extraordinary. You have people on board from over 50 nations at any given time. So it is such an international community that you learn so much from other cultures, living with them, living with people from the Netherlands, from Switzerland, France, Japan. I mean, all over the world, you learn so much from their cultures, but you also learn how they worship. And we have the same God and the same Bible, but culturally, they read it differently. They interpret it differently in such a beautiful way. And so we learned so much. Our faith grew so much, and our view of God grew so much just from the multicultural community on board. And I think one of the greatest things that we all learned, myself and my kids, and it's one thing, we've all heard this, but to really experience it and live it in a community it is so great to give your life away for the benefit of someone else. And here we were with people who are known in their area of expertise. They are excellent surgeons and doctors and nurses and, our captain of the ship. All these people have worked all over the world and are known for what they do, for their skills and their experience. But yet everyone comes on an equal playing field. No one's getting paid. There's no hierarchy on board. It's like you come as one family to accomplish one goal, and that is to bring hope and healing to the world's forgotten poor. And to see people give away and give up lucrative careers or to take, 3 months out of their lucrative career to just go give their life away. It was so inspiring, especially to my kids, to see like, oh my gosh, mom, so-and-so, he's a plastic surgeon in South Africa and blah, 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 and all these huge people that are so amazing and so brilliant. They just want to give their lives away to benefit the others. And I think that's because they've been impacted by Jesus. They've been transformed by Jesus. And so they just want to give it all away. And that is something that has just transformed all of us, is just to live a life with hands that are open, where you just want to give it away. Whatever I'm given, I just want to give it away. I don't want to hold on to it with clenched fists, whether that's money, or whether that's food or the gifts and the talents that God's given me. I don't want it to benefit myself. I want to watch it benefit God's children. Yeah, right? If we're all made in the image of God, then let's give to our brothers and sisters that don't have anything. So I think that generosity and just giving your life away is something that really, really changed all of us.
That's probably such a different climate to live in because you're kind of isolated. You're on that ship. So it almost probably feels like another world where you guys were.
Oh yeah.
That's so beautiful. So talk to me then, for anybody who's listening, that's like, oh my gosh, I want to connect with this. Is there a variety of ways to get involved and to serve, or to even be on the ship that maybe doesn't require, 2 years, sell your house, move your whole family? Is there shorter things? Do you have to be a medical expert? What does that look like?
Right. Absolutely. No, we have so many ways that people can get involved. Probably the most important and powerful way that people can get involved is just to pray, to pray for these countries. Right now, we're in Madagascar and Sierra Leone, to pray for the patients that are coming on board for their healing. They don't just get healed through free surgery, but they also get this soul healing in a lot of ways, because they've been outcast. They've been shunned in their communities, and they've been told that they're cursed because of a tumor they have, or their legs are windswept. And so a lot of these people have real traumatic emotional scars. But when they come on board, they're looked in the eyes and they're given a hug and they're touched and they're seen and they're known. And that begins healing in them long before they ever get into an operating room. So to just pray, just to pray for our patients, pray for our crew, pray for our safety and our health. But also people can give, as we mentioned, this is a nonprofit. We are all volunteers. And if people maybe can't go, but they have the gift of, being financially blessed or successful, then to be able to give to Mercy Ships is great. And then there is the option to come and have an adventure of a lifetime and come and serve with us on board. It is a floating city. We don't just need doctors and teachers and nurses. We also need teachers and HR executives. We have baristas on board for our cafes. We have receptionists, we have HR folks. anything, if you have the skill, we need it. And there's a range of time commitments. Some people come just for 3 months. Some of our surgeons just come for 2 weeks and, do as many surgeries as they can in their area of expertise, and then they leave. But there's a whole range, and all of that can be found on our website at mercyships.org/serve. You can find all the opportunities to partner with us, but also the volunteer positions that we need.
Wow, that sounds so incredible. I'm over here like, ooh, 3 months. That would be a wonderful summer break adventure to take your family on.
Yes, absolutely.
That's so cool. Okay, so I love that you just shared how everybody can connect, and I'm going to get online too, and I'm going to look just to see what might be a good fit for my family, because we're a missions family. We have a missions organization ourselves because we take so many trips. But I've always wanted to do something with the whole family, and I've always loved Mercy Ships. I told you earlier how I went to Bible school around the corner from it, and so I've been onto the base in Tyler, and it's just a beautiful organization. So as we wrap this, can you share maybe a story of a patient that you experienced, something that was just, maybe it was your first encounter where your mind was just, it was eye-opening how this changes people's lives?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many. It's really unbelievable to watch someone's life be transformed and to have that privilege, to have that front row seat, to watch, someone come on board the ship one way and leave the ship a whole different way. And I'm not just talking physically, but there was this one woman, and she was actually on board a couple years before we were, but her nurse who cared for her was on board with us. And she talked about this woman so much that I felt like I knew her. Her name was Rugi, and Rugi suffered from a fistula. Now, y'all don't know what that is. Fistula kind of means hole, but in these developing nations where they really have little to no access to medical care, some pregnant women will labor for 4 or 5 beyond days. And obviously that would never happen with us in the United States. If we have any complications, we're have a C-section immediately. But without that access to medical care, these women will labor, and they will give birth to a stillborn baby. And in the process, their bodies are just torn apart from that baby trying to, be born. And a fistula is usually a hole in the bladder where these women will leak urine. And Rugi in particular, after she delivered her stillborn baby, she leaked urine and her husband rejected her. And that is what often happens. And the community shuns them because they smell. And Rugi had been living for 10 years out in the bush alone. And every night she would take off her wet dress and she would wash it, and then she would hang it out to dry. And in the morning she would put it back on, only for it to be wet again, within an hour. And this was her life. And we found her. Our screening teams go out into remote villages to find patients that we can help. And Rugi was found and brought on board. And when she got on board, her healing began before she even, met with a doctor, because she met other women that had her same condition. She thought she was the only one. She had been all alone. She hadn't been physically touched in 10 years.
I can't imagine.
And so when Nurse Kelly held her hand, Rugi looked at her and would not let go of her hand, and held her hand for hours, and was just so overwhelmed that someone would touch her and love on her. But the community that was built amongst these women is so incredible. So after these women receive their surgeries and they're healed and they're dry for the first time in years, we have a huge party for them called the dress ceremony. And we give them each a brand new dress made of African fabrics, which the African fabrics are unbelievable. The colors, the patterns are gorgeous. They get new dresses and a headdress. And then we throw a huge party for them where all the crew's invited, with singing and dancing and just a huge celebration of their new life. And that's really kind of what happens to all of us, right? When Jesus takes the broken parts of our lives and makes us new, he kind of puts a new garment upon us and celebrates us. Wow. And that's what we get to see all the time on board with our patients, whether it's a kid with a cleft lip and palate, or a woman with a fistula, a child with severely bowed legs from malnutrition, or these people that come in with these massive benign tumors on their face that will kill them because they can't have them removed. We get to see just new life be brought to them as they are kind of, their dignity is restored and they're shown the love of Jesus. So, it's just, anyone who goes on board our ships, whether it is a patient or a crew member, they leave and they are never the same again.
That's incredible. That's such a beautiful story. I love that. I'm so glad you shared that. Well, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story and sharing just how Mercy Ships is impacting people around the world. I know for anybody who's listening, if you have a shred of desire to impact lives, these stories moved you. And if you guys want to connect, like she had said earlier, if you want to connect and just see what you can do for whatever time frame that you're available, that they take for, I mean, it sounds like there's all sorts of different time frames that you guys take volunteers for. You go to mercyships.org/serve. I'll put that in the show notes as well so that you guys can get a hold of that. And then you also have a podcast. If they want to hear more about all of this, your podcast, can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. The podcast is called New Mercies, and I interview doctors, nurses, different crew members from every department on board the ship. It really would give you a great overview of what all goes on. But some of the stories that are shared by our nurses and doctors, I cry. I mean, it doesn't get old. I just cry every time when you hear about the work that God's doing. It's really impactful.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. That sounds like such a good, we're always looking for things to play in the car when the kids are with us that will just like feed their souls so they're not just stuck on their phones, whatever. And so that sounds like really great to have playing in the car when you're traveling with your kids.
Absolutely.
So that's amazing. Well, Rayanne, it was so nice to meet you. And thank you for what you guys have done and what you are doing and the way that you're connecting people to this mission and impacting lives. It's beautiful.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you guys, thanks so much for listening to this episode at Java with Jen. Make sure that you tune in, hit subscribe anywhere that you heard this episode. Hit subscribe so that you don't miss any other upcoming ones. Again, if you'd like to connect with Mercy Ships, you go to mercyships.org/serve. And then also you can check out their podcast called New Mercies and follow these stories and pray about it. You never know if the Lord might be calling your family, calling you to go serve for a season on one of these ships and see your life radically transformed as well. So you guys have a wonderful week. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store, where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.